It was just an old woman on a broken bicycle, trembling in the bitter wind, her frame barely supported by the rusty metal of her wheels. Mechanic Jake Miller, who had been working in the cold, caught sight of her from the corner of his eye. She was stopped by the roadside, her head bowed low, shoulders shivering, and cheeks streaked with tears. The sadness in her posture stirred something in Jake. Without pausing to think, he stepped forward, dropping his tools on the workbench. From across the garage, his boss yelled with scorn, "She's not a paying customer. Get back to work, Miller." But Jake didn't listen. He crossed the road quickly, his boots crunching against ice, his breath fogging up in the freezing air. The woman had fallen, the bicycle's front wheel twisted, and the chain dislodged. Jake knelt beside her, concern softening his voice. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, offering his hand. Her eyes, wide with pain and a touch of shame, glanced up at him. Her gray hair had escaped her knit cap and scattered across her weathered cheeks. "I just needed to get to the pharmacy," she whispered faintly, her voice barely more than a breath. "My legs. They're not what they used to be." Jake nodded solemnly, offering a supportive arm to help her rise. "You shouldn't be out here alone in weather like this," he said. "Let me fix the bike for you. Come inside, where it's warm." With gentle care, he guided her into the shop. He sat her down near the space heater and handed her a cup of hot coffee from the employee pot. She cupped it in both hands like it was a lifeline. Meanwhile, Jake wheeled the broken bicycle to the back of the garage and began his inspection. That was when the booming voice of Ron Dorsey shattered the calm. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Miller?" It echoed across the garage like a threat. Jake turned slowly. Ron, the shop's owner, was tall and stocky, perpetually red-faced, always chewing on a splintered toothpick like it was a cigar. His brows were furrowed, eyes narrowed with disdain. He looked at the woman with a sneer, then glared at Jake. "You're wasting company time on a piece of junk and some old lady who's not even a paying customer." Jake stood up, wiping his hands. "She fell outside. Her bike was broken. She's trying to get to the pharmacy." "I don't give a damn." Ron barked. "You want to be a hero, do it after hours. This is a business, not a soup kitchen. Get her out. Now." Jake's hands clenched at his sides. "I already fixed the chain. She'll be leaving in just a moment." Ron's face twisted into a snarl. "Nope. I've had enough of your attitude. You're fired. Grab your stuff and get out of here. Now." The entire garage fell into a hush. The other mechanics stopped what they were doing, frozen mid-task, watching in awkward silence. No one spoke. The woman opened her mouth to protest, but Jake shook his head quietly. "Thank you for the coffee," she said softly, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. "And for your kindness." Jake walked her outside, no job, no plan, no backup. And yet, as they parted ways on the sidewalk, he didn't regret a thing. The very next morning, just as the faint golden hue of dawn began to touch the rooftops of Brookhaven, Jake, still in his bathrobe and slippers, stepped out onto his porch, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. What he saw made his heart lurch in his chest. 7 black, gleaming luxury SUVs rolled down his street in synchronized silence, their tinted windows reflecting the early sunlight like mirrors. One by one, they turned into his driveway. Their engines purred, low, powerful, expensive. Neighbors stood behind windows and curtains, watching in stunned silence. Someone down the street gasped. A dog barked in alarm. Jake stood frozen, mouth slightly open. Then, slowly, one of the SUV doors opened. Out stepped a tall man in a black suit, sharp and polished, every detail of his outfit meticulous. He walked up Jake's driveway with the grace of someone used to command. He adjusted his tie and locked eyes with Jake. "Mr. Miller," he said in a calm, clear voice, "she would like to see you." Jake's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "She?" Before he could finish the question, the back door of the lead SUV opened. And there she was. The same elderly woman from the day before stepped out, but she wasn't the same woman. Not really. Gone was the worn wool coat, the tear-streaked cheeks, the trembling hands. Now, she was dressed in an elegant navy blue jacket, tailored perfectly to her frame. A golden brooch shaped like a leaf glimmered on her lapel. Her shoes were leather. Her stride was confident. Her presence had changed, as if a veil had been lifted. She walked toward him with ease, her head held high, her eyes twinkling with calm authority. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice warm, her smile genuine. "May I come in for a moment?" Jake blinked. Sure. "Of course," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Inside, his small, cluttered living room looked even more modest in her presence. Yet she didn't comment or seem uncomfortable. She sat down gently on the sofa while her security detail waited outside, invisible behind the tinted SUV windows. Jake, his heart racing, offered her tea with shaking hands. She politely declined. Then, from her designer handbag, she pulled out a thick, well-organized file and placed it on the coffee table between them. "I never told you who I was," she began, her voice soft but firm. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore." Jake's eyebrows rose. That name. He had heard it before. On news broadcasts. In business magazines. Whitmore Technologies was one of the most powerful and innovative defense and aerospace contractors in the entire country. Eleanor continued, "We manufacture high-grade alloys, satellite components, and advanced defense systems. Yesterday, I was in disguise, testing something very specific. For the last 3 months, I've been visiting small businesses across America, dressed plainly, without identification, to see how people treat me when they think I have nothing to offer." She leaned forward slightly. "You, Mr. Miller, passed a test that no one else has passed. You didn't hesitate. You didn't question my worth. You helped me with no expectation of reward. You treated me with dignity, and you risked your job to do what was right." Jake sat down slowly, stunned into silence. Eleanor flipped open the folder. Inside were documents, formal, detailed, complete with seals and signatures. "I'm offering you a position as head of mechanical operations at our newest research facility," she said. "It comes with a 6-figure salary, full benefits, relocation support if you'd like to move, and a personal workshop built to your exact specifications." Jake could hardly breathe. "Ma'am. I didn't even go to college," he said, barely above a whisper. I just fix cars." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I know," she said. "That's what makes your story more impressive. Raw talent is hard to find. But even rarer is integrity." She stood and adjusted her coat. "You have 24 hours to decide. But something tells me you already know what you want." Then, without another word, she walked back to the SUV. The convoy drove away, leaving Jake speechless, heart pounding, thoughts spinning. Inside, his phone buzzed with messages from every neighbor on the block. Some had taken photos of the black SUVs. Others just asked, "What just happened?" Jake didn't answer. He sat on his couch, staring at the envelope in front of him. For the first time in years, his world didn't feel so heavy. That night, Jake barely slept. His thoughts spiraled around Eleanor Whitmore's words, her presence, and the impossible offer she had placed on his small, scratched kitchen table. He reread the documents over and over again, as if they might suddenly vanish in a puff of smoke or prove themselves to be a cruel prank. But no matter how many times he studied the contract, ran his fingers along the embossed seal, or flipped through the benefits and workshop schematics, it remained undeniably real. A 6-figure salary. A private workspace. A leadership position. It was everything he had never dared to imagine. What overwhelmed him most, though, wasn't the money, or even the job title. It was the way Eleanor had looked at him. Like he mattered. Like he wasn't invisible. Like someone finally saw beyond the oil stains on his shirt and the scuffed leather of his boots. She hadn't seen a mechanic, she had seen a person of worth. Jake had spent years working in that garage, feeling like a disposable cog. His kindness had been ridiculed. His ethics were questioned. But now, in less than 24 hours, everything had flipped upside down. At sunrise, he took a walk to the garage one last time, not as an employee, but as someone choosing to say goodbye. He walked in quietly, just as the morning light crept through the dusty glass panels. No one was there yet. Jake stepped to the corner where his toolbox sat. He placed his palm on the workbench, remembering all the hours he had poured into it. Every frustration. Every late shift. Every quiet moment when he had fixed more than just machines, sometimes, he'd fixed his own hope. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely audible. Then he packed the tools that mattered into a small, red metal bag, the same one his grandfather had given him as a boy, and walked out, not once looking back. When he returned home, a different black car, not the SUVs, was already waiting outside his modest home. The woman who stepped out was sharply dressed, elegant, and carried herself like someone used to managing the unmanageable. Her dark sunglasses gave her an air of polished mystery. She extended her hand. "Mr. Miller, I'm Jessica Lane. Personal assistant to Ms. Whitmore. She's asked me to assist with your onboarding process, logistics, paperwork, relocation. Whatever you need." Jake nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. I've never worked anywhere like this before," he admitted. "That's precisely why she chose you," Jessica replied with calm clarity. "Ms. Whitmore isn't hiring a resume. She's hiring a person." Then she handed him a sealed envelope. "This is your sign-on bonus. Ms. Whitmore asked that you only open it after you say yes." Jake looked down at it, heart thudding. Jessica's tone softened. "If you're ready, I can take you to the facility now. You can see what your future might look like." Jake paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said with a breath. "Let's go." The drive was quiet, long enough for Jake to reflect and short enough to make him feel like everything was happening too fast. Each mile took him further from his old life and closer to something new. But he still carried the weight of his past with him, the grease under his nails, the silence of his empty fridge, the memory of his mother's tired smile. As the car pulled up to the facility, Jake sat up straighter in awe. It was nothing like he expected. Towering glass walls caught the light like prisms. Rows of solar panels lined the roof. Wide-open courtyards featured sculpted trees and benches. Engineers in tailored uniforms moved briskly, holding tablets and talking in low, focused voices. This wasn't a job. This was another world. Inside, Eleanor was waiting. She greeted him like an old friend. "Welcome, Jake. You made the right choice," she said, extending her hand warmly. Her confidence was infectious. She didn't hesitate, immediately leading him through the research center. Every corridor was a marvel of modern engineering, labs with robotic arms assembling prototype machinery, rooms with complex displays and blueprints. Then she paused at a heavy metal door. With a swipe of her badge, it slid open with a soft whoosh. "This," she said, "is your workshop." Jake stepped inside and stopped in his tracks. The room was vast. The walls were lined with immaculate tools. Lifts. Engine bays. Advanced diagnostic systems. Tables ready for custom builds. There was even a custom drafting table, just like the one his grandfather used to sketch ideas on. "This," he breathed. "This is a dream." Eleanor nodded. "Talent deserves the right environment," she said. "You treated an old woman's broken bike like it was a priceless engine. That told me everything I needed to know." Jake was speechless. He could barely take it all in. But even in this perfect space, a question lingered in his mind: why me? Why now? Eleanor must have sensed it, because as she walked toward the exit, she paused. "Tomorrow," she said, "you'll understand everything. You weren't chosen by chance." The next morning, Jake arrived early. He stood outside the gleaming building, staring up at the architecture as if it still might disappear. The air smelled of fresh-cut metal and promise. Inside, Jessica greeted him with her usual poise. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Ms. Whitmore is expecting you upstairs." She led him through a long corridor lined with framed photographs and awards. Snapshots of inventions. Newspaper clippings. Patent certificates. But one particular photograph brought Jake to a halt. It was old, sepia-toned. A teenage Eleanor stood beside a man Jake recognized instantly, worn hands, wise eyes, proud posture. It was his grandfather. Jessica noticed. "You recognize him, don't you?" Jake nodded slowly. "That's my grandfather, Thomas Miller." Jessica smiled. That photo was taken 42 years ago. He mentored Ms. Whitmore when she was just a girl. Jake stood there, rooted to the floor, stunned. His grandfather had never spoken of this. The man who taught Jake how to work with his hands, who raised him after his parents passed, who preached honesty and kindness above all else, he had changed the life of someone who went on to change the world. Inside her office, Eleanor stood by the tall window. She turned as Jake entered, smiling softly. "Your grandfather saved my life, Jake," she said. "Not with money or influence. But with kindness." Jake said nothing. He just listened. "I was 16. My parents had just died. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I wandered into a junkyard in tears. And there he was. Your grandfather. He gave me food. A place to sleep. But most importantly, he gave me belief. He looked at my hands, showed me how to work with them, and told me I had something special. That I could build things. That I could change the world if I just believed in myself." Jake felt tears sting at the corners of his eyes. She turned, walked to a glass cabinet, and retrieved something carefully. A red metal toolbox, weathered, but clean. She placed it on the table and opened it slowly. "He gave me this," she said. "I kept it all these years. And now, it belongs to you." Inside were tools Jake hadn't seen since childhood. Wrenches, screwdrivers, even the old flashlight with his initials carved into the handle by a pocket knife. The weight of memory hit him like a wave. "I never got to thank him," Eleanor whispered. "But through you, I can." Jake looked up, overwhelmed. "You already have," he said. But she wasn't finished. "There's one more thing I want to show you." Eleanor led Jake down through a series of winding corridors, each one quieter and more secure than the last. The air grew cooler. Lights along the walls dimmed to a gentle hum. Steel doors required facial scans. At last, they stopped at one final barrier, an enormous vault-like structure with reinforced sides and a console that blinked red until Eleanor input a long, intricate passcode. With a low hiss and a mechanical groan, the thick door opened. Jake stepped inside and gasped. In the center of the room stood a massive, otherworldly machine. It was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Sleek and aerodynamic, the vehicle's surface shimmered with a blue-silver finish that seemed alive, glowing faintly as if charged with static energy. The curves were smooth, elegant, and futuristic. It looked more like a spacecraft prototype than any earthly automobile. What is this?" Jake asked, his voice hushed with awe. "This is Project Horizon," Eleanor said quietly. "A dream your grandfather helped design decades ago. He was one of the first people to imagine a vehicle that could operate forever, powered by renewable energy, zero emissions, self-repairing systems. He sketched the initial concepts with me when I was still learning. But the technology didn't exist back then. So we shelved it." She walked slowly around the machine. Now, the technology does exist. And it's time to build it, not just as an experiment, but as a revolution. She looked at Jake and smiled. I don't want you to just work on this. I want you to lead it. Jake stared at her, eyes wide. You want me to lead this? Eleanor nodded. You have the hands. You have the heart. And you have the legacy. Your grandfather started this. You'll finish it. Her voice was steady, unwavering. You won't be alone. I'll stand beside you. We'll bring this to life. Together. For a long moment, Jake said nothing. Then, without a word, he walked forward and reached out his hand. His fingers brushed the surface of the prototype. It was warm. Alive. Full of possibility. When he turned back, his expression had changed. I'll do it, he said. Let's build it. From that moment forward, Jake poured himself into the project with everything he had. He was no longer the man who turned wrenches in a dusty corner of a neglected garage. He was now the steward of a vision, a legacy of engineering, hope, and kindness, passed down from his grandfather and reignited by a woman he once helped on a frozen morning. The workshop became his second home. Days bled into nights as he fine-tuned components, ran diagnostics, and navigated complex systems with the same ease he once applied to brake pads and timing belts. He worked with engineers who had degrees from the world's best universities, and earned their respect not through pedigree, but through precision, intuition, and passion. Jake's hands did more than fix things, they brought impossible ideas to life. Obstacles came, as they always do. Some systems refused to cooperate. Others had to be reinvented from the ground up. But Jake never flinched. Whenever he hit a wall, he thought of his grandfather, how he used to sit quietly with a broken carburetor for hours, listening, studying, refusing to give up. Jake did the same. And Eleanor was always there. Offering insights, encouragement, and reminding him of the mission's bigger purpose. Together, they pushed forward, a quiet storm of innovation and integrity. Word began to spread. Quietly at first, whispers in tech circles, speculative blogs. Then louder. Industry insiders began to take notice. The young mechanic from a small town who had once been fired for helping someone, was now leading one of the most ambitious energy projects in history. Jake's name began appearing in headlines. The man behind the Horizon Project. Mechanic to visionary. Reporters requested interviews. CEOs asked for partnerships. Investors called, curious and eager. But Jake remained grounded. Always remembering where it started, with a broken bike, a cold morning, and a choice to help. Then, at last, came the day of the test. The entire facility stood still. Engineers, assistants, executives, all gathered silently in the lab, breath held. Jake stepped forward, placed his hand on the ignition panel, and flicked the switch. The vehicle responded immediately. It came alive with a gentle hum, the sound of energy moving without waste, of power flowing clean and true. Lights danced across its surface. Gears shifted. Wheels turned. And then, gracefully, powerfully, it moved. Not with a roar, but with a whisper of confidence, gliding across the floor like it had always known how. Applause broke the silence. Tears welled in Jake's eyes. It wasn't just a successful test. It was something more. This machine was more than a prototype, it was proof. Proof that one act of kindness could change the world. Proof that someone discarded by the system could rise to lead it. Proof that legacies lived on, long after the hands that started them were gone. That night, Eleanor approached him on the viewing deck, where he stood watching the stars above the city skyline. You've honored your grandfather, she said. And made his dream your own. Jake turned, emotion thick in his voice. You gave me a chance. You saw me when no one else did. No, she said, smiling, you made yourself seen. I just had the good sense to recognize it. In the days that followed, Project Horizon captured national attention. Major networks ran specials. Schools taught lessons about Jake's story. Thousands wrote letters of thanks and inspiration. Jake had become a symbol, not of wealth or power, but of integrity, humility, and the transformative strength of compassion. As he stood before an audience at a major clean energy conference, lights blazing and cameras rolling, he shared his truth. He spoke of the old woman on the broken bike. The garage. The firing. The offer that changed his life. And the deeper truth behind it all, that we never know which small, kind act might be the one that shifts everything. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, not just for the machine he'd built, but for the humanity he'd kept intact through it all. After the event, a man in a tailored suit approached him. "I'm Marcus Reynolds, CEO of SolarNova," he said, shaking Jake's hand firmly. "Your vision aligns perfectly with ours. We want to help take Horizon to every major city in the country." Jake nodded, humbled. The chain of kindness he had unknowingly set in motion was now looping the globe. That evening, Jake returned home, stood on his back porch, and watched the sunset stretch across the sky in bands of fire and gold. The same porch where the SUVs had first rolled up. Where everything had changed. He had been judged. Discarded. Overlooked. But he had also chosen kindness. And in return, he had been given purpose. Now, with a future brighter than ever, Jake knew one thing above all: the journey was far from over. There were still people to inspire, challenges to face, lives to touch. He had risen, and he would keep rising. Not for fame. Not for glory. But because someone once believed in him. And because he had believed in doing what was right. The road ahead was unknown. But Jake Miller, the mechanic who helped a stranger, would face it with the same tools his grandfather gave him: his hands, his heart, and the courage to never stop believing.